Narrator: what if the very foundations of human history were built upon a deliberate, sophisticated lie? What if the myths whispered by the oldest civilizations, dismissed as mere allegory by generations of scholars in their dusty university halls, were in fact cold, hard historical record? And what if the object of those myths, a colossal planet, a celestial dreadnought, was not only real, but had just been confirmed by the most cutting-edge British surveillance technology? This is not the stuff of pulp fiction or conspiracy theory. This is the story of Dr. Evelyn Reed, a meticulous, painfully objective astrophysicist based in the northwest of England, and the monumental, career-destroying secret she uncovered deep within the secure servers of Project 3i Atlas. Dr. Reed was, by all accounts, exactly the kind of academic fixture the scientific establishment adored. Educated at Cambridge, sharp as a tack, and with a penchant for tweed jackets and weak Earl Grey tea, she specialized in gravitational perturbations in the distant reaches of the solar system, focusing particularly on the scattered disk objects beyond Neptune. Her life was predictable: the rhythm of peer review, the quiet hum of data processing, and the occasional trip down to London for a rather dull Royal Society dinner. But Evelyn carried a burden, a gnawing curiosity that defied her logical training. She had always found herself drawn to the fringe, particularly the voluminous and often ridiculed works concerning the Sumerian king list and the alleged planet Nibiru. It was a guilty pleasure she never dared admit in the common room. After all, the very mention of Zechariah Sitchin's name in polite astrophysical company was enough to earn one a lifetime of professional ostracization. Project 3i Atlas, the advanced tri-interference astronomical tracking and long-range surveillance system, was a network of sensitive arrays, partially funded by the Ministry of Defense, designed initially to track near-Earth objects with unparalleled accuracy. Its power lay in its ability to filter gravitational noise and detect minute deviations in the orbits of distant, minor bodies. Narrator: the winter nights in Cheshire were long and biting. Evelyn often worked alone in her small flat near the observatory, the smell of damp earth seeping in through the poorly sealed window frames. It was here, during a routine sweep of post-Neptunian orbital data, that the first irregularity manifested. Not a single rogue object, but a pattern of gravitational influence far too large, too distant, and too consistent to be explained by conventional models like Planet 9. She checked the calibrations. She reran the complex algorithms. She even had the lead technician, a grumpy fellow named Derek, who enjoyed a good pint down the local pub, check the physical sensors. Everything was nominal. Yet the data persisted. A massive, undetectable gravitational signature was subtly shaping the outskirts of our system, almost like a shepherd guiding a flock. Evelyn, running on days of lukewarm coffee and shortbread biscuits, felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. The geometric structure of the perturbation wasn't random, it was elliptical, highly eccentric, and its apparent period, based on the slow drag observed over decades of archived data, seemed to hover around the 3,600-year mark. 3,600 years. The number echoed in her mind, a terrible chime across the millennia. It was the exact orbital period assigned to Nibiru, the planet of the Anunnaki, the mythological gods who allegedly visited Earth to mine gold and establish civilization. Evelyn tried to rationalize it away. Coincidence? Statistical anomaly? A flaw in the Atlas programming? She spent weeks trying to break the pattern, to prove it was rubbish. But the more she scrutinized the figures, the clearer the picture became. The maths was undeniable, and the conclusion was terrifying. Something immense was approaching, following an orbital path meticulously documented by the Sumerians thousands of years ago. Narrator: the Sumerian clay tablets, housed in secure vaults beneath the British Museum, told a story dismissed as primitive cosmology. They spoke of the Mulmul, the star cluster, and the crossing planet, which brought the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. The scholars pointed to the lack of hard scientific evidence, but Evelyn now possessed that evidence, courtesy of a multi-million-pound British telescope system. Her initial fear gave way to a chilling professional certainty. She had found a celestial body so massive, so distant, and moving on such a long trajectory that its existence defied standard astrophysical prediction, yet perfectly matched ancient prophecy. She knew instantly that she could not publish this finding through official channels. The mainstream would not merely reject it, they would destroy her for even suggesting it. This revelation was not just about a planet, it was about acknowledging an external, intelligently guided influence on human history. The air in her flat grew heavy, oppressive. The scent of rain and wet asphalt suddenly seemed symbolic of a deeper, existential dampness. She was standing at the precipice of a global scientific revolution, forced into silence by the sheer absurdity of the truth. She looked again at the projected orbit, the vast ellipse stretching out into the dark unknown. Nibiru was real. And if Nibiru was real, then the Anunnaki were real, and their return was scheduled. The tension of holding such a world-altering secret began to consume her. She found herself glancing over her shoulder even when queuing for a latte at the local Costa Coffee. Her colleagues noticed the shift. The meticulous scientist was becoming jumpy, withdrawn. She started locking her office door, a practice unheard of in their open-plan trusting department. This terrifying discovery demanded a choice: professional survival and continued silence, or absolute candor and potential ruin. For Evelyn, the choice was never truly a question. The truth, however bizarre, had to be revealed. She just needed to find a way to leak it without being immediately discredited or, worse, silenced permanently by those who prefer history to remain neatly catalogued in museum display cases. If this beginning has already made you rethink what you knew about history and science, imagine what lies ahead. This is just the surface of the Anunnaki files. So go on, leave your like right now and subscribe to the channel, because here every video reveals something few dare to show. Narrator. Evelyn Reed understood the power of precedent. Throughout history, groundbreaking scientific theories have rarely been greeted with open arms and celebratory champagne. They are met with resistance, ridicule, and often outright suppression. Knowing this, she began to implement protocols of secrecy worthy of MI6 itself, isolating the crucial data from the rest of the 3i Atlas archive. The system itself was a marvel of British engineering, a proud collaborative effort between university researchers and government defence contractors. Its data was supposedly immutable, logged across multiple secure servers in different geographical locations, from the North Yorkshire moors to secure bunkers beneath London. But Evelyn, as one of the lead architects of the data filtration software, knew its vulnerabilities. She knew exactly how to create a digital ghost, a simulated gravitational signature that mirrored the true pattern, allowing her to extract the real, raw data while masking its existence from the automated security checks. Her hands, usually steady when calibrating a spectrograph, trembled slightly as she compiled the final encrypted package. She was extracting thousands of lines of code and observational data detailing the precise orbital parameters of the celestial body they had codenamed the Shepherd. This package, if decoded, provided irrefutable evidence of a massive object moving towards the inner solar system, its period confirming the Sumerian accounts of Nibiru. But she wasn't just downloading numbers. She was downloading proof of an ancient manipulation, a cyclical visitation that suggested humanity was not alone, nor was it master of its own destiny. The Anunnaki were not merely mythological figures. They were temporal architects, leaving breadcrumbs in the oldest known human language. Narrator. Evelyn had initially approached the Sumerian texts with academic detachment. The descriptions of Nibiru as a winged disk or a crossing star were usually attributed to artistic license or misunderstood planetary conjunctions. Yet, Sitchin's theory, however controversial, argued that these texts were literal accounts of extraterrestrial visitors from a planet with a vast elliptical orbit. They came, they genetically engineered early hominids into Homo sapiens, the black-headed people, and they departed, promising to return. The detail that haunted Evelyn the most was the precision of the Sumerian star maps, which contained knowledge of objects that should have been invisible to naked-eye observation thousands of years ago. How could they know the exact trajectory unless they had recorded it from the perspective of the visitors themselves? She thought of the long, dreary corridors of the university campus, the perpetual scent of old institutional polish and damp textbooks. It was a world that valued comfortable ignorance over unsettling truth, and she was about to smash that comfort into a million pieces. Narrator. Her first instinct was to find validation. She needed someone outside the rigid, self-policing world of UK astrophysics, someone who understood the history and the mythology without immediately dismissing it as mental rubbish. Her mind turned instantly to Professor Alistair Finch. Finch was a brilliant but utterly disgraced archaeologist, forced into early retirement after dedicating 2 decades of his career to promoting the literal translation of Sumerian creation myths, suggesting that the gods Enki and Enlil were not deities, but advanced extraterrestrial commanders. He lived in a cluttered, musty flat in Edinburgh, surviving on a small pension and the occasional lecture gig to niche audiences obsessed with alternative history. Evelyn remembered meeting him briefly at a dreadful conference in Manchester years ago. He had possessed an intensity bordering on mania, yet his eyes held a piercing intelligence that few conventional scholars could match. He was exactly the kind of eccentric, brilliant mind needed to bridge the 600-year gap between the cuneiform tablets and the Atlas data. As she drove her aging Vauxhall down the motorway, the wind buffeting the small vehicle, Evelyn felt the weight of her isolation. She hadn't told anyone, not her department head, not her family, certainly not Derek the technician. To speak the word Anunnaki in an official capacity was to instantly relinquish credibility. But with Finch, she knew she could speak plainly. The journey north felt like a retreat, a desperate flight from logic into the arms of dangerous speculation. The British landscape rushed past, fields separated by dry stone walls, small villages huddled against the drizzle, the typical overcast sky providing a perfect backdrop for the immense grey weight of her secret. She needed to ensure that her communication with Finch was untraceable. She stopped at a secluded motorway service station, the kind filled with exhausted lorry drivers and the smell of cheap fry-ups. She purchased a burner phone and a prepaid SIM card, paying in cash. A small, almost ritualistic action, but one that signaled her crossing of the professional Rubicon. She was no longer just a scientist. She was a custodian of suppressed global history, now operating outside the protection of the state. She was a rogue. The thought of the astronomical body, the shepherd, circling back from the deep freeze of space, felt almost unreal compared to the mundane task of buying a new SIM card. Yet the reality of it was pressing. The orbital mechanics dictated a return date, and that date was not centuries away. It was frighteningly close. She had to accelerate her timeline. If you've reached this point without pausing, it's because this revelation has truly captivated you. This knowledge demands to be shared, so strengthen this content. Hit that like button now and share it with someone who desperately needs to see the real story behind the myths. Narrator. Alistair Finch's flat was a testament to his obsession and subsequent academic downfall. Every available surface was covered in books, photocopied documents, and stacks of neatly labeled yet indecipherable Sumerian clay tablet replicas. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco. When Evelyn arrived, soaked from the persistent Scottish rain, he greeted her with the tired, guarded welcome of a man accustomed to ridicule. "Dr. Reed," Finch said, his voice raspy yet carrying a theatrical undertone. "To what do I owe this utterly unexpected pilgrimage? I thought Cambridge scientists preferred the sanctity of their ivory towers, far from the rubbish I dedicate my life to." Evelyn ignored the sarcasm, her focus purely on the objective at hand. She didn't waste time on pleasantries or the exchange of typically British small talk about the atrocious weather. She laid the burner phone on his rickety kitchen table, pulled out her encrypted USB drive, and got straight to the point. "I need a code breaker, Professor. Not for language, but for history. I have the astronomical data that confirms the existence of Nibiru, but I need you to confirm the intent of the Anunnaki according to the most literal, non-allegorical translations of the Eridu Genesis and the Atrahasis." Finch, who had been initially skeptical, leaned in, his eyes wide. He reached for his battered spectacles, the frames held together with insulating tape. He was used to cranks and enthusiasts, but this was different. This was a verifiable, highly respected astrophysicist operating in deep shadow, speaking the forbidden names. Narrator: Evelyn displayed the data, the vast looping elliptical path, the gravitational footprint, the calculated mass, and most critically, the timing. The visual representation of the Nibiru pattern was striking. A massive celestial highway connecting the outer system to the inner, looping around the sun, before retreating once more into the galactic void. Finch didn't speak for a long time. He simply stared, adjusting his glasses, a thin plume of pipe smoke curling around the projected image. The sheer mathematical elegance of the trajectory was compelling, even to his archaeologically focused mind. The pattern was too perfect, too consistent with the scattered Sumerian references he had spent his life compiling. "The 3,600 years," Finch finally whispered, tapping a long, bony finger against the projection. "The SAR. They didn't just document its existence, Dr. Reed. They mapped its usage. It was their return platform, their seasonal transport system. If your data is accurate, and the precision is terrifyingly precise, it means their scheduled arrival is imminent." Evelyn nodded, her face grim. "Imminent meaning within the next decade. The perturbation effect is becoming increasingly noticeable on the minor trans-Neptunian objects. The Atlas system detected it because of these tiny ripples. It's like feeling the wash of a massive ocean liner approaching while you're standing on a pier in a small harbor." Their discussion dove deep into the intersection of myth and metric. Finch explained the Sumerian concept of the Anunnaki's presence, their hierarchy, their primary objective, mining gold to repair their home planet's atmosphere, and the profound impact their genetically engineered slaves, mankind, had on Earth's environment. If they returned, it wouldn't be for a pleasant reunion. It would be to check on the progress of their resource extraction operation and potentially to reset the current human civilization. Finch pulled out a large, heavy book, its pages brittle with age. It was a rare translation of a tablet fragment found in Iraq in the 1920s, largely ignored because of its disturbing content. It described the Great Deluge not as a natural disaster, but as a deliberate event initiated by the Anunnaki leader Enlil to wipe out their creations after humanity became too numerous and noisy. Narrator: The chilling implication was clear. The return of Nibiru meant the return of the Anunnaki administrators, and if they found humanity had failed to meet their operational standards, or worse, had become self-aware and uncontrollable, history might very well repeat itself. The flood narrative was potentially a blueprint for civilizational reset. Evelyn, usually focused on the cold physics, felt a profound philosophical shift. She wasn't just tracking a planet, She was tracking a potential executioner of her entire species. The sterile objectivity of the Atlas system had delivered a chilling, existential verdict. "We have the what," Evelyn stated, pushing her hair back nervously. "Now we need the why and the how for the general public to believe us. The data alone will be dismissed as a hoax or a glitch. We need context. We need the narrative that connects this celestial body to the British Museum's most hidden archives." Alistair Finch lit his pipe, a plume of thick smoke obscuring his face momentarily. "We need to do more than connect the dots, Dr. Reed. We need to construct a narrative so airtight that the Ministry of Defense, MI5, or whatever alphabet soup organization funds your telescope cannot discredit it before the public reads it. We are challenging 5,000 years of consensus." He paused, a glint in his eye. "We need to write the new Eridu Genesis, and we need to ensure they don't get us before we finish the first draft." The stakes had just escalated from academic rivalry to survival. Evelyn knew that by seeking out Finch, she had officially stepped onto the wrong side of powerful, shadowy forces determined to maintain the status quo. Narrator. The partnership between the astrophysicist and the disgraced archaeologist formed a peculiar, yet devastatingly effective, intellectual fortress. Evelyn brought the precision of the cosmos. Finch brought the forgotten language of creation. They worked tirelessly in the cramped, airless confines of the Edinburgh flat, powered by strong Scottish tea and a shared sense of impending doom. Evelyn refined the Atlas data, not just showing the orbital path, but highlighting the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in the Kuiper Belt objects, the sentinels that were being gravitationally nudged as Nibiru drew closer. She found that the displacement pattern mirrored certain celestial omens described in Babylonian astronomical texts, often linked to the appearance of a great comet or a new star. These omens were not superstitious warnings. They were scientific records of precursor effects. Finch, meanwhile, delved into the deep, dark corners of Sumerian mythology, focusing on the details of the Anunnaki's operations on Earth. He explained the significance of the Abzu, the Deep Earth, and the establishment of Eridu, the first city, allegedly built as a base of operations near the Persian Gulf. The texts described the Anunnaki using advanced technologies, flying vessels, the MUs, and sound weapons that perfectly aligned with modern declassified accounts of military technology. "They didn't just build cities, Dr. Reed," Finch explained, pointing to a diagram of a ziggurat. "They built landing platforms and orientation markers. These structures were navigational aids, designed to be seen from space, aligning perfectly with the orbital path of Nibiru at specific points in its cycle." The sheer scale and geological durability of these ancient ruins suggests they were never intended as temporary settlements. Evelyn used her knowledge of satellite mapping and geomancy to cross-reference Finch's archaeological claims. She input the coordinates of the most significant megalithic sites, Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, the pyramids of Giza, into her orbital software. The result was breathtaking, a near-perfect alignment grid that mapped directly onto the known trajectory of Nibiru. Narrator. The scientific and historical evidence converged into a singular, irrefutable narrative. These monuments were markers for the return. They were placed strategically thousands of years ago, acting as a giant planetary welcome mat for the Anunnaki. The psychological toll on Evelyn was immense. She had left behind her life of predictable, peer-reviewed science for a clandestine operation that risked not only her career, but potentially her freedom. She often woke up in a cold sweat in Finch's guest room, haunted by the images of cuneiform script and giant, approaching planets. "You already stopped the world, Evelyn," she thought to herself, watching the grey morning light struggle through the Edinburgh window. "Now you must tell them why it has stopped." She began to draft the formal research paper, titling it The 3P Atlas Convergence, a mathematical validation of the Sumerian celestial body, Nibiru, and its gravitational signature on trans-Neptunian objects. She structured it to be impeccable, using the stringent language of astrophysics, burying the controversial link to the Anunnaki deep within the historical appendix, forcing the reader to accept the science before confronting the mythology. Meanwhile, Finch focused on creating the public-facing primer, a readable, persuasive document designed to accompany the scientific data, translating the ancient texts into modern, accessible terms. He detailed the history of the Anunnaki's interaction with humanity, their creation of the Lulu, primitive workers, and the potential consequences of their return. But as they worked, Finch began to notice subtle signs that they were being monitored. The old landline telephone in his flat would occasionally emit a faint click when no one was on the line. The postman, usually a cheerful Scottish chap, suddenly seemed replaced by a stern, suited individual who simply dropped the letters and left without a word. "We are known, Dr. Reed," Finch observed one damp evening, stirring his tea. "Whitehall does not spend millions on a system like Atlas merely for academic curiosity. When you extracted that data, alarms went off in some very secure basement deep beneath London. They are watching the data. Now they are watching us." Evelyn felt a familiar chill. The British state apparatus, famous for its quiet efficiency and pervasive surveillance, was closing in. Her departure from the observatory had likely been flagged as a routine sabbatical, but the security logs would show the massive data extraction. It was only a matter of time before someone connected the missing data to the location of the world's foremost and most notorious Sumerian literalist. They needed a distribution strategy that was fast, viral, and impossible to contain. A traditional academic journal was out of the question. It would take months, and the government would exert sufficient pressure to have it blocked or heavily redacted. They needed the internet, the great, untamed frontier of global communication. Do you ever stop to consider how many historical narratives are simply comfortable lies? If you've been tracking this incredible journey of discovery and betrayal, then you're one of the few who dare to look beyond the surface. So strengthen this investigation. Hit that like button now and send this link to a fellow truth seeker. Narrator. The threat of state surveillance forced Evelyn and Finch into a rapid, high-stakes operational tempo. They had to act not only quickly, but intelligently, leveraging the very interconnectedness of the modern world that the intelligence agencies relied on to track them. Evelyn, drawing on her deep understanding of cryptography and network architecture, skills she had honed during her university years, initially for mundane academic security, began constructing a complex distribution chain. The goal was to fragment the data and disseminate it across multiple secure international servers, making it impossible for any single governmental body, even the formidable security services operating out of Vauxhall Cross, to simultaneously seize and delete the entire package. She envisioned the release not as a single event, but as a digital cascade. The core Atlas data, the scientific evidence of the Nibiru pattern, would be packaged with Finch's concise summary of the Sumerian translations. The entire file would be double encrypted using cutting-edge quantum entanglement keys, ensuring that even if intercepted, decoding would take months, by which point the file would already be global. The atmosphere in Finch's small flat was electric with tension, an odd juxtaposition of ancient history and bleeding-edge digital strategy. The smell of dust and antiquity mingled with the sterile scent of new electronic equipment. "The key is the timing, Professor," Evelyn murmured, adjusting the settings on a borrowed server rack. "We must release this during a high-traffic global event, a major election, a significant international crisis, when their sensors are already overloaded. We want it to be noise, initially, just another data spike." Finch, acting as the resident historian and cultural anchor, worried about the public reaction. "The world is not ready for the concept of cyclical extermination, Doctor. They are not ready to accept that the myths they read about in Sunday school were procurement logs for alien slave labor." The initial reaction will be panic, followed quickly by derision, orchestrated by the state. They discussed the inevitable counter-narrative. The government would immediately deploy experts, controlled voices from the Royal Society, to declare the Atlas data a glitch, a misinterpretation, or worse, a deliberate hoax perpetrated by a discredited rogue scientist. Evelyn had to preemptively address every possible avenue of attack within her scientific paper. Narrator. Finch suddenly remembered a minor detail from a Sumerian text he had found years ago, an obscure reference to a signature left behind by the Anunnaki. It wasn't a structure or a piece of technology, but a deliberate change in the Earth's geological structure near their initial landing sites. A heavy isotope contamination consistent with advanced fusion technology or mining operations. Evelyn immediately saw the value. She used open-source geological survey maps, focusing on the historical region of Mesopotamia. She cross-referenced the coordinates with the known location of the first Anunnaki cities. Sure enough, there were recorded, unexplained anomalies in the gravitational and elemental maps of the region. High concentrations of exotic isotopes that shouldn't naturally exist there. This provided an entirely separate line of evidence. The Anunnaki didn't just exist in the sky, they left physical scars on the Earth. This geological signature, once linked to the astronomical data, made the case almost unassailable. It showed that the visitors were not just mythical beings, but physical entities that interacted violently with our planet. The urgency intensified when Evelyn received an anonymous encrypted message on the burner phone. It was a single line of code, but she recognized the internal signature. It originated from the deepest security layer of the Atlas system. The message read, "Priority redundancy alert. Pattern lock initiated. Acquisition team pending." Evelyn gasped. "They've started the shutdown sequence," she told Finch, her voice tight. "Pattern lock means they've identified the specific data set I compromised. Acquisition team pending means they know where I am, or at least who I'm talking to. We have hours, Professor, maybe less, before a car full of chaps in dark suits from Whitehall are knocking on your door, demanding a friendly chat." They worked with furious haste. Evelyn finalizing the encryption keys, Finch writing a final desperate plea for humanity to examine the evidence immediately upon release. The smell of fear was now palpable in the cramped flat, overriding the scent of tobacco and old paper. They decided to use a network of decentralized academic servers outside of NATO jurisdiction, places like Iceland and Switzerland, where jurisdictional disputes would buy them critical time. The file would be scheduled for a timed release, triggering simultaneously across dozens of platforms worldwide. Finch looked out the window at the quiet, cobbled Edinburgh street. "I suppose this is where my career truly, spectacularly ends," he said, a grim smile on his face. "But perhaps, for the first time, it will have served a purpose greater than dusty old textbooks." Evelyn placed her hand on the cold steel of the server rack. "If we succeed, Professor, our careers are the least of our worries. If we fail, the world will continue to sleep, unaware of the vast elliptical noose tightening around its collective neck." They were ready. The only thing left was to execute the transmission before the acquisition team found them. If you've been following every intricate detail of this desperate struggle against the establishment, you understand the magnitude of this secret. The truth is often buried deepest by those who benefit from the lie, so strengthen this investigation. Hit that like button now and send this link to a fellow truth seeker. Narrator. The warning was not academic, it was existential. The acquisition team was not a technical support unit. It was a clean-up crew, dispatched by a highly secretive arm of the British government dedicated to the preservation of global stability, which, in their lexicon, meant suppressing any truth that might disrupt societal order. Evelyn and Finch had to move. They hastily transferred the critical equipment, the burner phones, the encrypted hard drives, and the small server rack into a battered, nondescript rucksack. They couldn't risk leaving any digital footprint behind. Finch knew the labyrinthine alleys and ancient winds of Edinburgh better than anyone. He proposed a route through the old town, weaving through centuries-old passages designed for foot traffic, impossible for surveillance vehicles to follow. "We need to blend in," Finch insisted, pulling on a heavy oilskin coat and a flat cap. "We look like a couple of academics out for a late-night constitutional, perhaps a pint at a terrible overpriced pub." Evelyn, wearing a sensible yet utterly nondescript trench coat, felt the panic rising. This was a direct confrontation with the deep state, a world away from the sterile safety of her laboratory. The cold, damp air bit at her face as they slipped out the back entrance of the building, moving quickly into the shadows. Narrator. As they navigated the twisting, narrow lanes, Finch pointed out landmarks that served as their escape route. An ancient graveyard, a concealed gate leading into a university courtyard, a maintenance entrance to a closed public library. Every turn was calculated to break the sightlines of any potential tale. Just as they reached a wide main road, the only way out towards the train station, they spotted the black Mondeo. It was parked conspicuously, its occupant scanning the pavement. "There they are," Finch muttered, pulling Evelyn sharply back into the mouth of a dark alleyway that smelled strongly of stale beer and refuse. "The chaps from the ministry. They're terribly subtle, aren't they?" They had to discard the original plan of taking a train south to London. The stations would be monitored. They needed a more obscure route, something that relied on the very inefficiency of the UK's regional infrastructure. "The lorry depot," Evelyn whispered, remembering a reference Finch had made earlier. "You mentioned a contact who drives a long-haul articulated lorry to Bristol." Finch's face brightened momentarily. "Old Jock. He's often resting near the docks before he takes the overnight run. He owes me a favour, a large one, regarding a rather obscure Roman coin forgery I helped him prove." The shift from the academic realm to the criminal underworld was startlingly smooth. Desperate circumstances demand desperate alliances. They abandoned the rucksack, ensuring the encrypted hard drives were safely secured in Evelyn's inner coat pocket, and navigated towards the docks, relying on Finch's knowledge of the city's underbelly. Narrator. The docks were a chaotic hub of nocturnal industry, the perfect cover. The noise of engines and the constant movement of massive container cranes provided a blanket of sound and distraction. They found Jock's enormous red and white lorry parked in a far corner, its engine idling, a low, comforting rumble. Jock, a massive man with a thick beard and eyes tired from years on the road, recognized Finch immediately. "Professor, you look like you've seen a ghost, or perhaps offended the entire archaeological fraternity again," Jock boomed, his voice echoing off the steel containers. Finch skipped the explanations. "Jock, we need a lift south. Bristol, ideally. We need to be invisible. No paperwork, no stops." Jock looked at the anxious astrophysicist beside Finch, then back at the professor's desperate eyes. He nodded slowly. "The back of the container is full of dry goods, tinned food and the like. It's not plush, but it's safe. No windows, mind you. You'll be in the dark until Bristol gets you past the bobbies on the motorway." Evelyn climbed into the dark, cavernous space behind the driver's cab, Finch scrambling in after her. The air was stale, smelling of cardboard and dust. The heavy metal door clanged shut, plunging them into absolute suffocating darkness. As the lorry pulled out, heading south toward the border, Evelyn pressed the hard drive against her chest. The scientific proof of the Anunnaki's return was now in transit, protected by the anonymity of the working class and the vast, dark network of British motorways. The tension, however, remained unbearable. She knew the acquisition team would not give up easily. They were racing the clock, and the future of human understanding hung precariously on the reliability of an old lorry driver and the strength of her encryption key. Narrator. In the belly of the articulated lorry, bouncing violently over the uneven British motorways, Evelyn and Finch had nothing but time and darkness to contemplate the gravity of their situation. The constant vibration made clear thought difficult, adding a surreal, nauseating quality to their desperate flight. Evelyn checked the hard drive repeatedly, feeling its cold, metallic edges through her coat. It contained not just the observational data from 3i Atlas, but the very calculus of human civilization's potential demise. Every bump of the lorry on the M6 felt like a threat to the integrity of the mission. Finch, seemingly more accustomed to rough travel, found a relatively comfortable spot amidst the crates of tinned custard and biscuits. He used the cover of darkness to mentally rehearse the historical context, the narrative they needed to embed alongside Evelyn's hard science. "They won't just say the data is false, Evelyn," Finch's voice echoed hollowly in the dark. "They'll say we are mad. They'll point to my history of eccentricity and your sudden, unexplained departure. We need a witness, someone credible, someone independent, who can vouch for the integrity of the Atlas system itself." Evelyn shook her head. "Atlas is classified, Professor. No outside auditor has access to the raw logs, only the filtered output. That's the entire point of the system, to provide information while preserving state secrets. My only real defense is the sheer mathematical beauty of the Nibiru pattern itself. It's too complex, too consistent over decades of observations to be fabricated." She explained the concept of digital watermarking she had applied. She had left a tiny, embedded sequence of code within the Atlas system that, when activated by the publication of their data, would emit a signal, a highly directional burst of encrypted information confirming the data's authenticity. This was her last fail-safe mechanism to validate the information should they be caught. But it relied on the assumption that the core system was still running and not yet compromised by the acquisition team. Narrator. The internal struggle Evelyn faced was profound. She wasn't fighting for personal glory. She was fighting against a deeply entrenched narrative of human exceptionalism. If the Anunnaki were real, then humanity was merely a utility, a resource, and every religious text, every political structure was ultimately based on the rules set down by alien overseers thousands of years ago. What will happen when the world knows it was created to dig for gold, she thought, the darkness amplifying her existential dread. Will chaos ensue? Or will humanity finally unite against the true masters? The lorry rattled on, crossing the border into England, passing the grim industrial heartlands. The journey was long and arduous. Evelyn focused on the mechanics of their escape and release plan, using the opportunity to refine the final, explosive sentence of their primer, the one that would truly grab the global consciousness. "We need to frame it not as a conspiracy, but as an awakening," Finch proposed, wiping sweat from his brow. The Anunnaki weren't gods. They were visitors who, like any advanced civilization, exploited a lesser one. The Sumerian tablets are the employee handbook, not the Holy Scripture. They discuss the implication of the Anunnaki's technology, the ability to manipulate gravity on a planetary scale, the genetic engineering capabilities, the staggering logistical challenge of interstellar travel. The fact that the UK government, and likely all major world powers, knew about this possibility and actively suppressed it, was a secondary yet equally infuriating layer of betrayal. Narrator. As the hours dragged on, Finch read aloud relevant passages from his memory. The description of the Anunnaki city of Lamu on Mars, the account of the building of the ziggurats, and the details of the Igigi, the intermediate class of alien workers who rebelled, forcing the Anunnaki to create the primitive human workforce. These stories, once dismissed as folklore, suddenly provided context and structure to Evelyn's elliptical curve. The lorry finally began to slow down, the vibrations changing pitch. They had reached Bristol in the pre-dawn hours, the docks here even more expansive and confusing than in Edinburgh. Jock rapped on the metal door. "Bristol. Quiet as a mouse out here, Professor. Cheerio, and try not to start a war with those academic chaps." Evelyn and Finch emerged, blinking in the weak sodium lamplight of the docks. They looked dishevelled, covered in dust, but the hard drive was secure. They had escaped the initial net. Now they needed a public terminal, a secure location, and the nerve to initiate the final countdown. Their next target, a neutral, highly trafficked public library in central Bristol, where they could upload the files amidst the morning rush. The weight of 5,000 years of concealed history rested upon their shoulders, heavy as the gravitational pull of Nibiru itself. Narrator. Bristol, a city renowned for its history and its independent spirit, offered a temporary sense of anonymity. Evelyn and Finch navigated the streets as dawn broke, the first hints of activity stirring the city. They looked for the telltale signs of surveillance: unusual cars, figures lingering too long in shadows, the cold, calculating gaze of a bobby. But for now, they seemed clear. Their immediate priority was to find a robust, publicly accessible internet connection that was not traceable back to a single IP address. A central library or a university campus offered the necessary bandwidth and the cover of legitimate academic activity. They settled on the main branch of the Bristol Public Library, timing their arrival precisely for its opening. The building was a beautiful but imposing structure of Victorian stone, smelling faintly of old books and polish. Narrator. Inside the library, surrounded by the comforting silence of shelved knowledge, they felt a temporary respite. Evelyn commandeered a corner terminal, plugging in her encrypted drive, while Finch acted as the lookout, pretending to browse the local history section, a field he genuinely despised, preferring the vast sweep of Sumerian antiquity. Evelyn was meticulously cautious. She didn't rely on the library's standard network. She used a series of nested virtual private networks, VPNs, routed through servers in Eastern Europe and South America, creating a digital trail so convoluted that even the most advanced interception technology would struggle to trace the origin point in real time. The core mission was the scheduled release. They had chosen a specific global event, an upcoming UN Security Council vote on a highly contentious issue, to mask the initial data spike. As Evelyn prepared the upload, she realized the profound, almost impossible magnitude of what she was about to do. This wasn't merely publishing a research paper, it was detonating an intellectual bomb beneath the entire framework of human belief. The scientific community would be forced to reconcile their established models with the existence of a planet that defied prediction. The religious community would face the physical embodiment of their gods, beings who were demonstrably powerful, yet morally questionable. Narrator. Her fingers trembled slightly above the execute command. What would the immediate consequences be? The stock markets, global panic, a military response. Finch, sensing her hesitation, placed a reassuring, bony hand on her shoulder. The truth must be told, Evelyn, no matter the cost. We are merely the messengers of 5,000 years of suppressed history. She took a deep breath, the scent of dust and paper filling her lungs. It's ready, Professor. The upload is initiating. It's set for a 30-minute delay, then simultaneous release across 12 independent servers. The file transfer began, the progress bar creeping slowly across the screen. They had 30 minutes until the digital explosion. 30 minutes until the world learned about the Nibiru pattern and the Anunnaki's cyclical return. They decided to leave the library immediately. They couldn't be present at the point of origin when the files went live. Narrator. They slipped out and blended into the morning crowd. The streets were now bustling with people hurrying to their jobs, sipping coffee, engaged in the mundane rituals of a world blissfully unaware of the celestial sword hanging over them. But as they walked, Evelyn noticed something unsettling. A street-cleaning lorry, parked down a narrow side street, seemed to have its engine running for an unusually long time. Its driver, though ostensibly reading a newspaper, had a crispness to his collar that spoke more of government employment than municipal sanitation. "The Mondeo didn't catch us, Professor," Evelyn whispered, keeping her eyes forward. "But they are here. They must have triangulated the approximate location of the burner phone's network activity." They quickened their pace, heading towards a busy public park, hoping to lose themselves in the early morning joggers and dog walkers. The park offered concealment, but also vulnerability. There were few escape routes. They needed to reach a secure point where they could monitor the release and activate Evelyn's digital watermark signal. Narrator. Settling onto a damp wooden bench, Evelyn pulled out the small, highly secure tablet she carried. It was designed solely for encrypted communications. She logged into a secure channel, waiting for confirmation that the mass release had initiated. "You already stopped the world, Evelyn." The feeling of anticipation was overwhelming, a mix of sheer terror and exhilarating achievement. They had done their part. They had delivered the message. Now the world had to decide whether to open the envelope. The clock ticked down towards the moment of truth, and the shadows of the acquisition team were drawing closer, quiet and efficient, like the grey London drizzle. If you have come this far, you are clearly someone who values truth over comfort. This narrative of ancient cosmic power and modern government cover-up is reaching its critical stage. So don't stop now. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, and ensure this message cannot be buried. Narrator. 5 minutes. In the vast, slow march of cosmic history, 5 minutes is nothing. But here, on a cold, damp bench in a Bristol park, it felt like an eternity. Evelyn watched the countdown timer on her small tablet, her breathing shallow. Finch kept a vigilant watch, scanning the perimeter. The park was filling up, offering both cover and increased danger. The weight of their responsibility pressed down on them. They were about to shatter the comfortable illusion of human uniqueness, forcing the world to confront its engineered origins. "Do you think they will understand the gravity of the 3,600-year cycle, Professor?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "that this isn't just a distant planet, but a recurring harvest?" Finch shook his head slowly. "The average chap worrying about the rising price of petrol and the poor performance of the England football team will dismiss it as nonsense. But the people who matter, the astrophysicists, the cryptologists, the powerful men in Whitehall and Washington, they will recognize the signature. They are the ones who will move to suppress it." He pointed discreetly towards a tall, middle-aged woman wearing sunglasses and pushing an empty pram, despite the overcast conditions. She was lingering near the park entrance, pretending to be distracted. "Another one," Finch confirmed. "They're closing the circle. They are trying to force us into a corner before the upload." The pressure was immense. If they were captured before the files went live, the acquisition team would not only delete the data, but would use sophisticated disinformation tactics to retroactively destroy Evelyn's credibility, fabricating mental health issues, forging confession letters, erasing her entire career history. Narrator. 60 seconds. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. She prepared the final code burst, the digital watermark designed to confirm the data's authenticity. It needed to be triggered the instant the main release occurred. She watched the woman, with the pram subtly adjusting her position, getting ready to move. 2 other men, dressed in unremarkable leisure wear, began to converge from different paths. The net was tightening, efficient and silent, typical of the UK's secretive state security. "They're coming, Evelyn," Finch warned, his voice low and urgent. 30 seconds. Evelyn focused entirely on the tablet, ignoring the approaching threat. The priority was the truth, not their personal safety. 10 seconds. She positioned her finger over the activation key for the watermark. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Narrator. Beep. The upload initiated. Across 12 independent, globally distributed servers, the 3i Atlas Convergence paper and Finch's Sumerian primer went live. The Nibiru pattern was loose in the digital cosmos. Simultaneously, Evelyn triggered the digital watermark. A tiny encrypted burst of data, confirming the time-stamped authenticity of the data, silently fed back into the core Atlas system logs in Cheshire. It was a digital message that screamed, "The data is real. It came from us." As the release went through, the woman with the pram dropped her disguise, moving rapidly towards the bench. "We need to move now, Professor," Evelyn commanded, slipping the tablet into her pocket. They bolted, not towards the city, but towards a high stone wall that separated the park from a labyrinth of terraced houses. A desperate, risky maneuver. They could hear the heavy thud of the agents pursuing them, the sound muffled by the damp morning air. Narrator. Finch, despite his age, showed a surprising agility, scrambling over the wall with a practiced ease, years of unconventional field archaeology serving him well. Evelyn followed, her mind focused on maintaining the secrecy of her hidden electronic device. The chase led them through back gardens, past surprised residents sipping their morning tea and looking out of their Victorian windows. They jumped fences, narrowly avoided a startled milkman, and finally spilled out onto a busy, narrow road filled with the morning traffic chaos. They needed to disappear immediately. Evelyn spotted a queue of people waiting for a number 73 bus. In Britain, queuing is a reflex, a cultural expectation, a natural form of camouflage. "The queue!" Evelyn shouted, pulling Finch towards the bus stop. They slipped into the long line of commuters, their racing hearts hidden by the mundane rhythm of the morning rush. The agents, clad in their unsuitable leisure wear, were forced to halt abruptly at the edge of the busy road, unable to maintain the chase without drawing significant public attention. They were visible now, frustrated, their quiet efficiency momentarily broken by the sheer randomness of a Bristol bus queue. Narrator. Evelyn and Finch were safe for now, swallowed by the comforting anonymity of the British public. The files were out. But the chase had just begun, and the world was about to wake up to a truth more profound and terrifying than any conspiracy theory. The great revelation had been made, but the fight to keep it accessible had only just started. Narrator. A double-decker bus, rumbling through the morning streets of Bristol, became their temporary sanctuary. Evelyn watched the faces of the other passengers, students engrossed in their mobile phones, elderly women carrying shopping bags, men in suits reading the morning papers. How many of them, she wondered, would have their entire worldview irrevocably shattered by the time they reached their destinations? The release was confirmed. The encrypted files, now propagating across the global network, were starting to generate noise. Evelyn pulled out her small tablet, connecting through a layered, disposable Wi-Fi connection. The initial response was instantaneous and predictable. Extreme skepticism and immediate attack. The first reports emerged from obscure fringe news sites, screaming headlines about the Anunnaki return and NASA cover-up. But within minutes, the more serious academic channels began to register the data. Astrophysicists, initially scoffing at the sensational titles, were forced to confront the hard physics within Evelyn's paper. The Atlas data was verifiable, the gravitational calculations were sound, and the orbital parameters for the mysterious Shepherd object were mathematically compelling. Narrator. The government's reaction, specifically that of the British state, was swift and comprehensive. Within an hour of the release, the official Atlas website was taken down, replaced by a bland message citing routine maintenance. Simultaneously, a press release originating from a nondescript government department in Westminster dismissed the data as the unfortunate work of a disgruntled former employee suffering from a significant lapse in professional judgment. They were trying to frame Evelyn not just as wrong, but as mentally unstable. "A disgruntled employee, am I?" Evelyn muttered. a flash of anger crossing her face. "They sound frightfully put out that I didn't stick to predicting meteor showers." Finch, however, noted the subtlety of the attack. "They didn't deny the existence of the gravitational pattern, Evelyn. They only denied your interpretation of it. That is the key. They cannot technically lie. They can only massage the truth." The challenge for the public now lay in deciphering the highly technical astrophysical paper. It was designed to resist immediate populist understanding, requiring specialized knowledge to truly grasp the monumental implications of the Nibiru pattern. That's where Finch's primer came in. His document, easily readable and cross-referenced with the scientific paper, provided the human, historical context. The digital battle lines were drawn. On one side, the hard, irrefutable math of 3i Atlas, coupled with 5,000 years of Sumerian prophecy. On the other, the overwhelming institutional noise of the state, determined to maintain cognitive dissonance and global order. Narrator. Jock, the lorry driver, had contacted a few friends in Bristol, people who owed him favours, and secured a safe house, a cheap, dreary flat in a council estate, smelling of stale cigarettes and disinfectant. It was unremarkable, easily overlooked, and exactly what they needed. As they settled in, monitoring the escalating global reaction on a borrowed telly, they saw the official response being amplified by mainstream media outlets. A government spokesperson, looking stern and reassuring, stated that the misleading reports were entirely unfounded and that Dr. Reed's recent emotional distress was under investigation. "My emotional distress?" Evelyn scoffed. "If they knew the truth of what is heading our way, they'd be in a state of terminal emotional distress." But the data was fighting back. Independent astronomers, using their own observatories, began to corroborate Evelyn's central claim. There was an unexplained perturbation in the outer solar system, consistent with a massive, distant object. They couldn't confirm the Nibiru link, but they confirmed the shepherd. The physics was holding up. The true moment of triumph came when a renowned historian of ancient civilizations, operating out of Oxford, went rogue. Professor Diana Hayes, a cautious, meticulous scholar, publicly stated that while she had always viewed the Anunnaki theories as fringe, the compelling nature of Finch's translated texts, when overlaid with the scientific data, could no longer be ignored. Narrator. This was the crack in the facade. An established, respected figure supporting the historical context. The conspiracy was gaining credibility, migrating from the forums into the hallowed halls of academia. The battle was far from won, but the truth had drawn first blood. Evelyn knew that the acquisition team, now facing a far larger problem than two academics on the run, would redouble their efforts to eliminate the sources of the contamination. They were now globally significant threats, not just internal leaks. This is not just a story. It's a critical investigation into the true history of our world. If this content is resonating with you and challenging your beliefs, please let us know. Hit that like button now and drop a comment. This is unbelievable. Just so we know you are completely engrossed in this relentless pursuit of the truth. Narrator. The world was grappling with cognitive dissonance on an unprecedented scale. News channels were consumed by the duality. Rigid scientific denial from official sources clashing violently with the terrifying mathematical proof published by Evelyn and the compelling historical narrative provided by Finch. The narrative of the Anunnaki files was fracturing global consensus. Stock markets experienced sharp dips as institutional investors, privy to high-level classified information, reacted to the verifiable astronomical data regardless of the Sumerian context. The potential for a cyclical, cataclysmic event, the return of the gods, and the potential for a new deluge was enough to rattle the foundations of the financial world. Evelyn focused on the digital defense. She was receiving an overwhelming barrage of messages, some of support, many of intense criticism, and a significant number that appeared to be highly sophisticated phishing attempts designed to trace their location. The acquisition team was now employing digital warfare, attempting to find the origin point of the data burst. "They're spending millions, Professor," Evelyn observed, watching a trace attempt bounce off one of her servers in Iceland. "They are desperately trying to prove this is a hoax, but they can't touch the raw data without acknowledging the existence of the Atlas system's classified inputs." Finch was worried about the emotional impact on the public. "They are treating the Sumerian elements like a cheap theatrical flourish. They understand the planet, the gravitational threat, but they refuse to grasp the intent." He emphasized the need for a further, more visceral revelation. They needed a concrete, undeniable link between the Anunnaki and modern human life, something that would make the average British citizen look at their DNA or their history and see the foreign imprint. Narrator. Finch reminded Evelyn of the genetic component of the Sumerian myth. The tablets described the Anunnaki engineering humanity from existing hominids, blending their own advanced DNA with early Homo erectus to create the Lulu, the worker. The key, according to the texts, was the Anunnaki's breath of life, a sudden, dramatic leap in cognitive ability and complexity that defied natural evolutionary timelines. "If the story is true, Evelyn," Finch explained, "there must be anomalous, non-terrestrial elements in the human genome, parts of the junk DNA that evolutionary science cannot account for, but that betray a sudden, external intervention." Evelyn, using her access to old academic networks, managed to find obscure, declassified reports from the Human Genome Project. Reports that detailed unexpected complexities in chromosome 2, specifically in the telomere regions, which seemed to suggest a rapid, non-linear fusion event in the evolutionary past. This was often dismissed as a peculiar evolutionary bottleneck, but when placed alongside the Sumerian creation myths, it looked suspiciously like deliberate genetic engineering. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The astronomical confirmation, Nibiru, the archaeological corroboration, the marker sites, and now the genetic footprint, the Lulu design. Evelyn began compiling a short, sharp addendum to their paper, highlighting this new synthesis of evidence. She would leak it using the same complex network, aiming for maximum impact before the government could fully consolidate its counter-narrative. Narrator. As she worked, she felt the chill of the acquisition team closing in again. The silence around the flat was too perfect. The constant noise of the council estate seemed unnaturally muted. They were in Bristol, but the entire city felt like a carefully managed cage. Suddenly, the lights in the flat flickered violently and died. The temporary power cut was too precise, too isolated to be accidental. "They've located us," Finch stated flatly, reaching for his walking stick, a heavy, brass-tipped object he usually used only for show. "They're attempting a blackout extraction. We need to go now." Evelyn quickly grabbed the hard drives and her tablet. They moved towards the back fire escape, the only way out of the block of flats that didn't lead directly into the hands of the waiting agents. They could hear the distant, subtle whine of sophisticated tracking equipment being deployed. They were hunting them like rats. Their escape was hurried, fraught with danger, climbing down a greasy metal ladder in the pitch blackness, the smell of burnt electrical wiring and stale rainwater heavy in the air. The fight for the truth had just transitioned from a digital war to a very physical one on the dark streets of a working-class British city. The Anunnaki files might be public, but the messengers were desperately fighting for survival. The pressure is escalating. Evelyn and Finch are in a deadly race against time and the state apparatus, all because of the truth about the Anunnaki. If you are still with us, you are part of the few who will not be fooled by comfortable lies. Hit that like button and share this documentary with every single person you know. This story needs to go viral to survive. Narrator. The blackout was a declaration of war. The acquisition team wasn't interested in a quiet arrest anymore. They wanted containment, silencing, and erasure. Evelyn and Finch scrambled out of the housing estate, navigating the complex layout of the concrete blocks in the darkness. They knew they couldn't risk another public vehicle. They needed to find a sympathetic neutral zone, a place where the state security apparatus hesitated to tread without explicit military authorization. "The docks again, Professor," Evelyn panted, adrenaline coursing through her. Large areas, high security, and too much jurisdictional confusion between the Port Authority and national agencies. We can hide among the containers. They made their way back towards the Bristol docks, moving through the empty, sleeping industrial zone. The cold Atlantic air, heavy with the smell of brine and oil, filled their lungs. As they reached the massive, razor-wire fenced perimeter of the port, they heard the approaching sirens, not the police, but low, unmarked vehicles. The state was mobilizing serious resources to recover the data and the people who released it. Narrator: the docks were a maze of towering shipping containers, stacked like giant metallic dominoes. This was a temporary sanctuary, a place where light rarely reached the ground, and where every shadow offered concealment. They found a narrow gap between two colossal stacks labeled Auckland and Shanghai, a temporary haven. Evelyn immediately pulled out her tablet. Despite the chaos, she needed to push the final addendum, the genetic and archaeological convergence proof. "I have to get this addendum out, Professor," she insisted, typing furiously. "The public needs the context of the Lulu, the genetic engineering. Otherwise, they will only see the astronomical threat without understanding the historical pattern." Finch watched the darkness, his heavy walking stick held ready. "Work quickly, Evelyn. We can hear the dogs now. They've brought in tracking units." The distant baying sound of highly trained security dogs confirmed their worst fears. The acquisition team was treating them as high-value, dangerous fugitives. Evelyn connected to a secure satellite phone network Finch had kept hidden, a last-resort method for ultra-secure communications. The upload was slow, excruciatingly dependent on a clean signal in the metal canyon of the containers. Narrator: every second felt magnified. The sound of distant footsteps and the sniffing of the dogs seemed terrifyingly close. Evelyn focused on the screen, pushing the compiled evidence, the proof that human DNA carried the signature of the Anunnaki's intervention. This detail, more than the planet itself, would seal the fate of the scientific establishment's denial. Transfer complete. Evelyn pulled the satellite phone's battery out, destroying the connection. "It's out," she whispered, relief momentarily replacing the terror. "The full convergence. Let's move." Just as they were about to slip further into the container maze, a harsh, blinding beam of light snapped on, pinning them against the steel wall. "Agent," voice only, authoritative, British accent. "Dr. Reed, Professor Finch, drop your devices and place your hands where we can see them. This is a matter of national security. Cooperate, and this will go smoothly." Narrator: the agents were clad in dark, non-reflective tactical gear, their faces obscured by the shadows and the glare of the torchlight. They were professional, silent, and efficient. The full might of the state security apparatus had finally caught up. Finch stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Evelyn, his brass-tipped stick held like a shield. "National security, is it?" Finch scoffed, his voice steady despite the imminent danger. "Or simply the security of the lie? You are not protecting Britain, you are protecting the comfortable consensus that ensures the Anunnaki's return is a surprise." The leading agent ignored the rhetoric. "Final warning, drop the electronic devices." Evelyn knew that if they surrendered, the truth would be compromised. The files were out, but the messengers would be silenced, discredited, or worse. They needed to buy time, to ensure the files propagated so widely they could never be fully recalled. In a desperate, reckless move, Evelyn hurled her hard drive, the physical embodiment of the Atlas data, high into the air, aiming for the roof of a stack of containers, knowing the fall would shatter the casing and render the data inaccessible to forensic recovery. The distraction was enough. Narrator. As the hard drive sailed over the containers, the agents reacted instantly. One broke formation to chase the falling device. The resulting fractional hesitation was all Evelyn and Finch needed. Finch swung his heavy walking stick, not at an agent, but at a precarious stack of empty pallets leaning against the container wall. The sharp, brass tip struck the central pallet with a resounding thwack, sending the entire stack crashing down. The wooden debris created a temporary screen and a surge of deafening noise. Evelyn pulled Finch sideways, diving into the deeper shadows beneath a massive parked crane. The agents, momentarily disoriented by the noise and the sudden darkness created by the moving crane, hesitated. They had lost their visual lock. "Split up!" Finch commanded, his voice strained. "Run!" Evelyn didn't hesitate. She ran deeper into the maze of containers, using the immense metallic structures as her cover. The sound of the agents shouting commands and the frantic barking of the tracking dogs echoed through the massive dockyard. Narrator. Evelyn was now utterly alone, cut off from her intellectual partner. Her only goal was to reach the sea, to disappear into the vastness that the British state apparatus found so difficult to completely control. She heard the agents converging on Finch's approximate location, the sound of a brief, brutal scuffle, followed by silence. She didn't dare stop or look back. She knew what that silence meant. Finch had been captured or worse. The truth now rested solely on the strength of her scattered digital data and her ability to remain unseen. She sprinted towards the end of the dockyard, where the loading zone gave way to the black, restless waters of the channel. She could see the faint outline of a small fishing trawler, its lights dim, preparing for the early morning departure. The acquisition team, realizing their primary target, Evelyn, the originator of the data, was still free, shifted their focus. The beam of the powerful torchlight swept the area, closing in. Evelyn reached the edge of the pier, the dark water churning below her. She had a choice: surrender to the inevitable or take a desperate plunge into the freezing water, hoping to reach the trawler before she succumbed to hypothermia or capture. She looked briefly at her reflection in the dark water, the image of a meticulous, tweed-wearing scientist replaced by a terrified, desperate fugitive. She clutched the remaining burner phone, which contained the final key encryption codes to unlock the deeper layers of her released data. Narrator. Without hesitation, Evelyn plunged into the frigid Atlantic water. The shock of the cold was instant, stealing her breath. She fought the immediate instinct to panic, focusing on the dark hull of the fishing trawler, barely 20 meters away. The agents reached the pier just as she submerged, their shouts of frustration echoing over the water. They couldn't risk a pursuit in the dark, turbulent water without specialized equipment, but they had blocked off the immediate exits. Evelyn swam with a desperate, frantic energy, the weight of her coat dragging her down. She finally reached the trawler's anchor line, pulling herself slowly, painfully, onto the slippery, barnacle-encrusted hull. She managed to secure herself in the shadow of a large coil of rope, utterly exhausted, shivering violently, but free of the immediate grasp of the state. As the trawler began to pull away from the dock, moving slowly out into the vastness of the channel towards the rising sun, Evelyn knew she had sacrificed everything. Her career, her comfort, and perhaps her partner Finch were lost to the silence of the docks. But the Anunnaki files were alive. The final piece of the Nibiru pattern had been shared, revealing that the Great Planet was not just a myth, but a schedule. And now the world was forced to wait and see if the return of the gods meant salvation, or just the next phase of the cyclical human harvest. Narrator. The grey waters of the Channel offered Evelyn Reed a tenuous form of freedom, but the cold, numbing chill reminded her of the cost. She was a fugitive, her name likely already circulating globally as a madwoman and a hoaxer, yet she carried the crushing, solitary knowledge of the Anunnaki's truth. The immediate aftermath of the data release was pure chaos. The scientific community was split between those who demanded full access to the Atlas system to verify Evelyn's claims and those who vehemently dismissed the data, often under quiet official pressure. The Sumerian link, the talk of genetic engineering, and the 3,600-year cycle ensured the story was treated largely as sensationalist conspiracy. Yet the raw physics was undeniable. Independent astronomical observations, forced into action by Evelyn's paper, began to confirm the unusual orbital disturbances in the trans-Neptunian region. They couldn't call it Nibiru, but they were forced to admit something immense is out there. Narrator. Governments worldwide, especially the G7 nations, issued carefully worded denials, assuring their citizens that all celestial bodies are accounted for and that there was no threat to planetary stability. But the sheer scale and synchronicity of the denials only served to fuel the fire of suspicion, validating the core claim of a global cover-up. What happened to Professor Finch remains a mystery, shrouded in the operational silence of Whitehall. The official line was that he was assisting inquiries. Those who knew Finch understood that he would never willingly cooperate with the very forces he dedicated his life to exposing. His disappearance became a potent symbol in the growing movement demanding transparency. Evelyn, now moving deep into the anonymity of the international shipping network, became a spectral figure, the one who leaked the files and vanished. She used the last remaining burner phone to transmit a final cryptic message, a single compelling data point, the projected tightest approach vector of the Nibiru pattern relative to Earth's orbital plane. The data revealed that the closest historical approach of the crossing planet occurred simultaneously with the Great Deluge documented by the Sumerians. The current orbit, the Nibiru pattern detected by Atlas, indicated that the next closest approach would occur in the mid-2030s. Narrator. This was the horrifying culmination of the Anunnaki files. The return was not theoretical, but imminent, and history offered a terrible precedent for what happens when they arrive. The true agenda of the Anunnaki remains open to speculation. Are they returning for resource harvesting, to monitor their engineered slaves, or, as Finch feared, to execute a civilizational reset after a long, deliberate period of absence? The Atlas data, the ancient tablets, and the genetic evidence converge on a single unsettling conclusion. Humanity is not alone, and our history is not our own. We were created for a purpose, and the masters who initiated that project are now returning to check the inventory. The question is no longer if Nibiru exists, but what we, as a species, will do with the 10 years remaining before the gravitational footprint of the great crossing planet, the home of the Anunnaki, begins to dominate our inner system, heralding a return that might be far from benevolent. The truth is out there, moving silently through the digital ether, waiting for humanity to choose between blissful denial and terrifying preparation. The files are open. The countdown has begun. If this deep dive into the Anunnaki files and the Nibiru pattern has completely shattered your perception of reality, then comment right now, "I reached the end." This helps us understand who is truly committed to seeing beyond the surface lies. Like the video, subscribe to the channel immediately and activate the notification bell, because the next episodes will explore the global consequences of this revelation. And don't you dare click away without hitting the next video that's on your screen. It is the logical continuation of this relentless journey.